Well, I've been sitting very patiently, which is hard for me given how much nonsense has been spoken so far.
I think it's quite wrong that so many people on the what I regard as quite far right.
ERG were worse than the far right. It's disgusting. These people have destroyed the meaning of the word and they should be ashamed of themselves.
So on legal migration, I'd probably agree around 100 to 150,000. I think you'd probably want people in strategic industries.
We did say before the debate that Aaron is moving to the right.
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. In this video, we are going to be watching a panel debate on immigration in Britain between Konstantin Kisin from Trigonometry Pod, who needs no introduction, Matthew Goodwin, who is an academic and a professor of politics, journalist and writer Polly Tonybee, and head of Novara Media and self-proclaimed communist Aaron Bastani. We're going to skip the opening statements and get right into the juicy parts. A lot to cover here, many interesting topics brought up, which I will provide much context on, so let's get into it.
About asylum seekers, well, the thing is they're going to get, once they're here, 75% of them are going to be granted access anyway. So what are we doing locking them up in hotels at vast expense? Unhappiness to them and to those all around who live in those areas. It's a very bad idea. Much better to let them get jobs straight away. And if that's an incentive, I don't think so. The National Audit Office looked at, as well as looking at the cost of, they also looked at what the pull factors were and said, very, very few migrants on the way here have any idea about what the rules are about when they can work, if they can work, are there benefits, what can they draw, what rights do they have. They know nothing at all. So the idea that, fiddling around with certain kinds of punitive ways of treating them when they get here will somehow deter them, or indeed that Rwanda will, I think is just wrong. As for demonizing them, well, that's not particularly helpful either. If you can either deal with them in some way, if you could find a way to send them all back or stop them coming here, fine, but nobody's managed to do that. If you can't do that, then you might as well treat them reasonably well, because they're going to be citizens, they're going to be parents, people are citizens. They're going to stop being they are going to become us, the way wave after wave of immigrants have for many, many, many generations. They become an us, and then we forget that they were they.
They become us, she thinks. So this lady thinks that immigrants become us because when you look at the history of immigration, the people that have come over to Britain end up assimilating and they create some sort of a cultural synthesis. Well, I mean, as you can see by this chart, if you're talking about pre-1945, then sure. However, the past few decades has seen a monumental rise in non-EU immigrants, which is what Konstantin means when he says that not all immigration is equal. This means countries like Pakistan, India, Nigeria, etc. And this is manageable to an extent, obviously, if the borders aren't being totally flooded as they have been. And it's different if it is the Irish and the Polish, as we can see happened before 1945. These are cultures that share an ancestral lineage with the Brits. I mean, European culture, for the most part, has a lot of similarities. They're generally Christian, or at least from Christian countries, and the cultural values are pretty much the same. They're not going to want to come in, for example, and create a Polish ethno-state. However, with the non-EU countries, it becomes unmanageable after a little while. Not that these people are bad, but it tears at the fabric of British culture. And just think about it if it were the other way around. If Westerners were, for example, pouring into Saudi Arabia, imagine they started building churches everywhere and building nightclubs and drinking in the street. Eating during Ramadan, girls start dressing like hoes. Imagine how that would go down. Do you think that those countries would put up with it? No, absolutely not. And to be honest, neither should Western countries. I mean, when I go to another country, I have the utmost respect and reverence for their culture because I know that this is an away game for me and I must respect the laws of the land. And guys, if you are interested in events that are happening around the world, like I am, then it's important to be keeping up with the news and going to the most reliable sources. This is why I use Ground News. It is the preeminent source of news in this current fake news climate. And I'll let you in on a little secret. I guarantee you that this is the source that all of your favorite YouTubers and independent journalists use when it comes to staying armed and dangerous. I mean, it provides you with all of the breaking news stories from around the world as they happen, but not only that, it also provides tens of thousands of sources and articles so that you can see how these stories are being reported from the left, center, and right. And check this out. You can actually adjust the location of the news you want to see. So for example, when I'm in America, I like to have it set to America. But if I want to change it, you can see that I can click here and I can go to UK, or I can go to Europe, or I can even do international. This way I'm able to cultivate the kind of news and from the locations that I am interested in. So make sure you check them out, guys, and take advantage of the amazing offer that they are offering to Rattlesnake TV viewers of 40% off unlimited access to the Vantage plan, which is what I use. All you got to do is hit that link at the top of the bio or pinned in the comments. ground.news/rattlesnake. That is ground.news/rattlesnake. Take advantage of this amazing offer, help out a great startup, and also support the channel. It's a win-win-win. And now on to the next clip, guys, where Konstantin quite frankly shows that there is levels to this game.
I'm going to challenge a few of those points later on.
Yeah,
because I think we're in cloud cuckoo land.
we're nearly moving on challenging.
Everything that we're living through now reflects a political choice. Our leaders took a choice, beginning with Tony Blair and then carrying on under David Cameron, to turn us into a country of mass immigration. That was a choice. We could make a choice to have a different future if we wanted. And in sectors like social care, higher education, NHS, we could make a set of different choices. We could say, let's expand the number of medical school places for British kids. Let's start investing in our kids to become NHS doctors. Some of the stories that we are now reading about on a pretty regular basis about what is happening in the social care system are horrific. I don't think many of us want to be looked after by somebody who cannot speak English, who cannot communicate with our relatives. I don't think our children should be taught in schools by teachers who are not trained to the same standard as British teachers are. And I don't think we should be looked after in the NHS by doctors from overseas who are not trained to the same extent as British doctors here. This is not controversial. This is just what most people think. And when Katie said at the outset, this is a divisive issue, this isn't actually a divisive issue. This is an issue in which 80% of people out there in the country say, I want less migration, and I want to live in a society that has a principle of national preference, which is the safety and security of the British people and our children comes before anything else. That is where your average voter is, and that is where this room is.
First and foremost, by the way, Matt, just to your point about this being a divisive issue, I think what Katie meant is it's a divisive issue in this sort of postcode. Outside the country, less so. But in terms of your point, Katie, my view is that numbers are less important than culture and values and ability to assimilate. For the reasons that I gave in my opening speech, Hong Kongers and Ukrainians are not causing social problems. They're integrating just fine. They speak English. They share our values. And they're going to be contributing to our society for decades to come. The problem is that not all immigration is of that nature, and that's something we have to be blunt and honest about, and we just haven't been.
Guys, before we continue this clip, make sure to quickly smash that like button and help me out with those algos. And if you like this content and if you're getting value, hit that subscribe button, the big juicy red one right there. Let's get back to it.
What you are setting out, Polly, is a recipe for disaster. What you are saying is that of the 114,000 people who entered Britain illegally over the last 5 years, and we've got maybe about 1 million people in the country illegally currently, is we should not only not provide any deterrent at all for other people to risk their lives by crossing the channel, but we should actually incentivize them to come over by giving them jobs and giving them more support through the welfare state and so on. And I actually think that's deeply problematic for several reasons. One is, I'll give you 2 words, Abdul-Azidi. Let's start there. Abdul-Azidi was somebody who entered the country illegally. He applied for asylum twice, was rejected twice. He then committed a serious sexual assault. He then was convicted in the court and then applied for asylum for a 3rd time, and was this time accepted because a priest signed off on his application. Abdul Azidi then took a car down to London and poured acid over a mother and 2 children, which, by the way, is why chemical attacks against women in Britain are now at the highest rate across Western democracies. We have the highest rates of chemical attacks against women in this country in the West. You don't hear that very often, by the way, in The Guardian, but it's true. Why is that? Why is that? It's because we're actively incentivizing people to come into this country who do not share our values, who do not want to live according to our ways of life, and who do not respect British law. The security services have said this very openly. They are monitoring daily many of the people who are coming into this country illegally. We need to get serious. We should leave any convention, international convention or court that prevents us from strengthening and securing our own national borders.
I think it's quite low to use anecdote instead of figures. Of course there are stories. Do you think there aren't stories about, all sorts of people who commit crimes, and you take someone who commits a crime and says, oh, well, that represents all migrants? I mean, it's not the way to conduct this argument. I think we've conducted this argument on a higher level than that on the whole.
Well, I've been sitting very patiently, which is hard for me given how much nonsense has been spoken so far. So, first of all, if they were your children, I don't think you would consider it an anecdote. And yes, nobody would deny that British-born people also commit crime. Yes, that is something that we have to deal with. There is no reason why we should import foreign criminals. Polly made the point that, if we remove all the immigrants, terrible things would happen. Nobody was suggesting that we remove all the immigrants. We're talking about the pace, the nature, and the scale of immigration, and the fact that it has been way too high and way too fast. I spent my whole opening speech talking about this. She then talked about the fact how, and both Aaron actually and Polly did this, that people who come here legally on small boats are a tiny percentage of the total immigrant population. You know why? Because our ridiculous high levels of net migration. That's why. The number of people who came to this country illegally on small boats in 2022 was 45,000 people. That is almost the same number of people who came into this country legally the year that I came into this country. That's the level of illegal immigration we now have. And they talk about how, oh, you can't stop the boats, it's very difficult. I've just come back from Australia. In 2012, they had 17,000 people come into the country illegally by boats. Last year, the number was 74 people, not 1,000, people. You know how? Because in 2013, they elected a government that promised to stop the boats and then did it. And the reason they were able to do it isn't they don't have the same problems with the laws and everything else. They had exactly the same problem. They just had politicians with balls. And finally, let me find a note of agreement. I actually do agree with Polly about the need for high wages. But of course, why would employers pay anyone high wages when they've got low-skilled, cheap immigration to replace people who you'd have to pay more money with?
So Konstantin is fantastic in these situations. When it comes to these panel debates on a stage, oftentimes they can get very boring and tedious, and people can really take the long way around to give the most academic and intellectual explanation of their points. But Konstantin has the ability to take pretty complex and important points, package them up into one-liners, and really deliver them in a way that is digestible and also oftentimes funny, and the audience gobbles it up, as you can see. The communication skills that he possesses and the comedian background allows him to really cut through the monotony of these situations. But to the point, Australia has had some great conservative politicians in the past, such as Johnny Howard and Tony Abbott. These guys did good work in terms of immigration and stopping the boat people, as they call them.
The undeniable fact is we stopped the boats coming in 2001. We went from having some thousands arrive in 2001 to a total of 2 people arriving in 2002. We stopped the boats.
If you stop the boats, you stop the smokes, don't you?
This is the most Australian thing you'll likely ever hear, besides this argument.
I'll slow down. Karen.
Karen, what are you, Kevin?
motherfucker. That's what you are.
Oh, yeah?
I just like to do the right thing, and when you come
Yeah.
taking
You got
out
nothing
everyone
better
in
to
their
do.
Christmas
Nothing better to
presents.
do to take the fun away from every Oh, that's it. Oh,
I
well.
hope you got that.
I did.
Good.
It's going straight on my Instagram.
Instagram, is that all you got?
No, I got TikTok as well.
Oh, TikTok, is that all you
Yeah,
got?
film this stuff.
Now, Australia certainly has their own problems with immigration, but they're definitely doing a lot better than Britain and America, that's for sure. And some of the policies that they've implemented have been copied and replicated in various places around the world. These policies include finding offshore facilities on distant islands where asylum seekers can be sent, processed, ideally treated with dignity and humanity, and then either deported or given a visa.
More than 2,000 asylum seekers have arrived at Christmas Island in the past 5 weeks. The Immigration Minister says there's still space in Australia's detention centres.
This way, you're able to actually get a proper assessment of who is coming into your country. You're able to do your due diligence. I mean, we saw what happened in Lampedusa last year in Italy when tens of thousands of migrants rolled up on the shores and doubled the population of the island. And guess what? This is going to keep happening to Europe unless something is done about it. And I mean, all that we hear about on the news these days is the war in Ukraine and then the war in Gaza. But the fact of the matter is that there are so many conflicts going on around the world that never make the news that cause millions of people to be displaced. And I mean, I'm going to try not to belabor this point too much, but I think it's important to just understand this in the context of this whole immigration debate. Eritreans have been fleeing the country for over a decade in order to try and escape a brutal regime that is conscripting young men. Furthermore, all of the families of the defectors or the people who have fled from the war are now being punished. And this is only from what we know, guys, because Eritrea doesn't exactly have a robust alternative media system that is reporting the facts on the ground. There's also the Tigray conflict in Ethiopia. Since November 2020, a civil war erupted in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. This conflict has led to widespread displacement with hundreds of thousands of people fleeing violence and seeking refuge in neighboring regions or countries like Sudan, and has left millions in need of some sort of aid. Niger, Nigeria, Chad, and Cameroon have been grappling with the Boko Haram insurgency for years. This is a conflict that has caused significant displacement, with millions of people forced to flee their homes. The South Sudan conflict. Since going independent in 2011, South Sudan has been plagued by conflict, which has resulted in widespread displacement, with millions of people either internally displaced or seeking refuge in neighboring countries. The Central African Republic crisis. Central African Republic has experienced cycles of conflict and instability with clashes between armed groups. Civilians have been subject to violence, displacement, human rights abuses, leading many to flee to neighboring countries to seek refuge or going to internally displaced person camps. Then you have the Sahel region instability. Countries in the Sahel region of Africa, including Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, they face complex security issues due to jihadist terror groups. This has also led to people fleeing the violence and trying to seek refuge in other surrounding countries. The Democratic Republic of Congo has also been plagued by decades of conflict and instability, fueled by political power struggles, ethnic tensions, and competition over valuable mineral resources. Armed groups continue to operate in parts of these countries, leading to, guess what, guys? Mass displacement and humanitarian crises. And guys, when you're fleeing your country and the destination for you that you're hoping to get to is Sudan, that means that this is desperate times. So needless to say, guys, Africa is replete with humanitarian disasters and crises that are constantly causing people to flee their homes in search of a better life. And also, it goes without saying, Africa is very poor. So there will be lots of economic migrants, lots of young men who, if they get the chance to go somewhere like Europe, they will take it. If the path is there and they can take it and they can go from working for under $1 a day in a hole in a cobalt mine in the Democratic Republic of Congo, they're going to do it. I'd do it. Wouldn't you do it? I mean, come on. Of course you would. And guys, before Gaddafi was deposed or killed, and who was responsible for that is for another video, but before that, Libya, due to its very strong economy because it was rich in oil, was a destination for African migrant workers. After Gaddafi was killed, though, when Libya fell, a power vacuum opened up in the country and tribal regimes and gangs competed violently to gain control. This opened up the way for human trafficking and people smuggling gangs to operate in that area, which has led to Libya being a transit point to Europe for displaced Africans. Gaddafi also had a pretty good relationship with Europe for a while there, and he would stop migrants from getting on boats. And so this is not going to change anytime soon. Libya is still in a state of chaos. And it sounds really brutal and inhumane to say turn the boats away or put these people on distant islands and processing centers. But the fact of the matter is that these voyages are not only bad for the destination countries, they're incredibly dangerous. What happens with these voyages is that these migrants or asylum seekers will pay these human smuggling gangs to get them to a certain destination. And so they'll take their money and then they'll put them on a rickety boat in the middle of the night, point them towards Europe, and won't give a shit if the boat sinks or not. They don't care if these people live or die. The less that these boat trips are embarked upon, the better in so many ways. And last point I'll make on this, with all of the negative effects of mass migration to Europe, all of the weight that it puts on European economies and the damage that it does to those economies, all of the political and social turmoil that it causes and the negative effects of that, wouldn't it just make more sense to take some of the resources that are currently being wasted on this crisis and to try and help these countries where they are? I mean, in the first 15 years of the 21st century, the poverty rate in Africa halved. Couldn't we just work to keep that trend going? I mean, food for thought, guys. On to the next part now, guys, where they talk about political representation in the United Kingdom and especially in the UK media, which is very topical.
Further to what Matt said, I actually think we've got to be even more blunt and honest about this issue. There will always be inequality in the world. There will always be countries that are poorer. There will always be countries that are richer. And the problem we've got ourselves into in the Western world is we've forgotten something that used to be quite common sense and consensus around all our countries, which is the idea that countries need borders. I have a whole chapter in my book, An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West, where I quote over and over and over again people who are left, right, up, down, etc., from about 3 minutes ago, from Barack Obama to Hillary Clinton to left-wing politicians in this country, who all sound like they're far right now. Because everybody used to agree that countries need borders. Yes, of course we can help other people in other parts of the world. And by the way, Western countries do a hell of a lot of that, actually. We contribute quite a lot of money to improving other parts of the world. But ultimately, some countries will be richer than others. And I'm afraid we're just going to have to be honest and say, we get to choose who comes in our countries. Sorry.
I mean, the very idea that we might leave the ECHR is so appalling that we would put ourselves into being a pariah state. Haven't we learned our lessons from Brexit? What happens? It didn't go so well, did it? Finding ourselves isolated and out on our own hasn't gone very well. We haven't made great new alliances. We haven't made great new friendships or trading relationships or anything. It's all been loss. Where is the sovereignty that we've gained? It hasn't felt like extra power or extra control. Of course, everybody feels they haven't got enough control over their life. It's part of living in a democracy that, you know, when there are 70,000 people, 70 million people or whatever, we can't all be in control. But the idea that we should continue to break away from old alliances and old agreements seems to me to be grotesque and deeply, deeply mistaken. And if it's just because of immigration, if that's what it was that caused Brexit, well, that didn't work out at all well, did it? And, you know, it was plainly a large part of it because so much of the campaign was really about that.
I actually wanted to ask Aaron a genuine question, which is, your organization is influential within the Labour Party, I think it's fair to say. I think it's fair to say we're about to have a Labour government. And I think it's fair to say that you agree with Matt and I that we shouldn't have illegal immigration. And you've just said that the only way to stop it is to leave the ECHR. Does that mean you will be pushing the Labour Party, when it gets elected, to leave the ECHR? Spicy.
So I think that the UK needs a massive constitutional overhaul. And I think I would be perfectly happy. There are some shibboleths which Liberals are attached to, like the Supreme Court, this venerable Supreme Court, which has existed since 2009. I don't care about the Supreme Court. I care about, I would like to see probably PR and an elected second chamber. But that's the sort of thing that matters to me far more. And in terms of ECHR, treaties come and treaties go. I would like to also see a minimal codified constitution codifying things like the right to freedom of speech, freedom of association. And again, I find it fascinating that you have politicians of all stripes who say, free speech, okay, well, can it be codified in law as my right? Every kid gets a small copy in their pocket. They're taught it at school. No. So it's not top of my agenda. And by the way, if you care about this stuff, getting rid of the ECHR and getting rid of the Supreme Court would be incredibly hard to do. It would take a whole parliamentary term. You might not be able to do it. It would expend a huge amount of political capital. So would it be up there for me alongside public ownership of water, mail, rail? No. But if you care about this stuff and that's your number one priority, then that's what you should be doing, sure.
Can I just add a quick word about constitutional reform? Absolutely right. Just let me not only what you say about the need for reform, but if we had proportional representation, I think that those people who feel passionately about immigration would be better represented. I think it's quite wrong that so many people on what I regard as quite far right have been denied their own party, and indeed so many people like you on the far left have also been denied it. And I do think that some of the anger would be taken out of it if you had people properly represented in Parliament.
I'd also like to see them properly represented in our media class. But I guess that's why we write Substacks. That is why we write Substacks, because we're genuinely independent of the legacy institutions which have consistently failed to understand what Brexit was really all about, as has the Tory party. So I think what essentially has happened, the whole premise of Brexit, all the research makes this clear, two motives: to create an independent, sovereign, self-governing nation with lower immigration and control borders. That's not a difficult political project to deliver. Okay, now what the Tory party decided to do was deliver the opposite of that. It spoke to the 15 to 20% liberal leaver vision of Brexit, which was mass immigration on steroids, London on steroids, let's help big business basically keep labour costs low and profit high, and to hell with everybody else. That was basically the liberal leaver vision of Brexit, which, by the way, Boris Johnson was architect-in-chief of that, okay? Boris Johnson was not a Conservative. And much of the Conservative Parliamentary Party, I hate to break the news, is not Conservative, okay?
I just wanted to take 1 second to address something that makes my blood boil, which we've just heard, which is this idea that to oppose uncontrolled mass immigration is far right. I feel quite strongly about this as someone who lost Jewish relatives in the Holocaust. The term far right has quite a clear and defined meaning in language. And the meaning is Nazis and people who believes that Jews should be murdered, and people who believes that Gypsies should be murdered, and people who believe that disabled people should be murdered. That is who the far right is. 56% of this country was concerned about immigration in 2015 before Brexit, as I said. Are you telling me that 50% or more of this country is far right by the definition I just gave? The irresponsibility of people on the left who have thrown that term around, starting with people like David Lammy, who said that the ERG were worse than the far right. It's disgusting. These people have destroyed the meaning of the word, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
So I would tend to agree with Konstantin there in the sense that they love it In the UK especially, calling people who are literally centrists far-right extremists. The left in the UK even calls Konstantin far-right. I mean, if Konstantin Kisin is far-right, you can call me Francisco Franco. And I've had Konstantin on the channel before, and I know he says that he's politically non-binary, but I would say that he's pretty much a centrist, maybe a little bit to the left even. He's pretty based on woke cultural stuff, but for the most part, he's like a classical liberal. He doesn't stand against abortion. He doesn't stand against things like gay marriage. He's an atheist. I mean, I'd put him in the same boat as guys like Dave Rubin and Stephen Fry. Not my flavor of cupcake, but they're good people. I like talking to them. More importantly, they talked about media here. And you guys might have remembered that over the past few years, GB News was created. And GB News is meant to be a kick in the nuts to the left-wing establishment media in the UK. And they got on board some of the GOATs, guys. Nigel Farage, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Calvin Robinson, Lawrence Fox, Dan Wootton. These are people who are meant to be more right-wing commentators, and it's meant to give that right-wing representation to the British media. Until, of course, Lawrence Fox said he wouldn't shag a socialist.
We need powerful, strong, amazing women who make great points for themselves. We don't need these sort of feminist 4.0. They're pathetic and embarrassing. Who'd want to shag that?
Oh, Lawrence. Well, look,
I mean, he had a few glasses of wine, he was on air, and that was enough to get him sacked. They caved to the pressure of the mob like that. And then his friend Calvin Robinson, who is a loyal friend, which is few and far between these days, guys, followed him pretty much out the door and got the sack as well.
My sin was loyalty, and my sin was actually believing in free speech on a channel that calls itself the home of free speech. But what it means is the home of free speech, but no, not that speech.
And then some strange details started to emerge about GB News, that the people behind the scenes were from BBC and these other places formerly, and they hated the values of these commentators. They didn't like them being Christian and talking about God. They didn't let Lawrence Fox have Tommy Robinson on the channel, and they seemed to just not like conservatives very much. And what this basically suggests is that, call me conspiratorial, but GB News is some sort of a psyop or some sort of controlled opposition, a place where they can control the conservative, dissident, right-wing narrative. And all this to say that Britain has a big problem with conservative media representation. And that's why you're seeing guys like Trigonometry pop up, who aren't even conservative, but occasionally they have conservative guests on and have some based takes. You've also got fellas like the Lotus Eaters guys, and they've got a good show too. And hopefully there will be more and more alternative media that continues to pop up and kick that narrative actually square in the nuts. And on to the last bit now, are Konstantin Cooks.
How many refugees per year should the UK resettle? And is community-led resettlement the best approach? Let's go to Matt and then to Aaron, if that works.
I'd actually like to hear the left's answer to this question first, because critiquing current policy on refugees and illegal migrants, the one thing that continuously irritates me is nobody ever says what the upper limit is. It's let's have open borders, let's have safe and legal routes. Let's not have an active deterrent. Let's have fluid borders. What's the upper limit? And while we're here, what's the upper limit on legal migration? I'll tell you mine. I think maximum, where the average voter is, we should have legal migration, a high skill policy, high wage, high thresholds of somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000, roughly where it was just before Tony Blair came into power. I don't think anyone here is saying we should have zero immigration, though I could be won over by the argument that maybe we should have a 5-year freeze and let's have a moratorium, but that's another question. What's the upper limit?
Yeah, so on legal migration, I'd probably agree around 100 to 150,000. I think you'd probably want people in strategic industries.
Aaron, you should just be sitting over here.
Pardon?
We did say before the debate that Aaron is moving to the right, so.
Well, I still think immigration's a good thing. It still has net benefits if done properly, not like it has been over the last 14 years. That was what I tried to convey over there. I would say between 100 and 150,000 people. I think you probably want to get them into strategic industries, computer scientists, engineers, medical health professionals. And then on top of that, you probably want some kind of green card scheme. I think it's quite sexy. I quite like the film Green Card with Gerard Depardieu, can't lie. And then I think, in terms of upper limit on asylum seekers, I think we should have probably a coordinated approach across Europe, 50,000 maximum. But of course, look, it's elastic. Sometimes you're going to get far lower, like in the 1990s. You might have something like Hong Kong, Ukraine, where it's significantly higher and the public supports that kind of stuff. So it's a hard question. I'd say 50,000. And it should be coordinated across Europe. And I'd say this. We have to accept there is a connection between foreign policy choices and asylum. One of the miracles of the last 25 years is that Iran didn't become a failed state. Iran didn't become Iraq, because tens of millions of Iranians would have come here as refugees. And that was one of the key foreign policy proposals of the Bush White House. So tread lightly in your near abroad if you don't want millions of people coming here. And actually, I think that's probably somewhere where the left and right are in agreement. You see that. You see that in the United States. We don't want to be messing around abroad. And I'll say this, sorry, one more thing. I know we're having to be quick. And it's about our foreign policy interests not aligning with the United States. America doesn't mind if it starts mad wars in the Middle East, which create high energy inflation and tens of millions of people going to Europe. Why? They're not affected. They're an energy exporter, and they are separated from the rest of us by the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. And I cannot understand for the life of me why Europeans are so gleefully indulgent of their mad escapades. It means displaced people coming here and higher energy costs.
What time frame is realistic to reduce immigration to your desired level, given the need for social care and NHS staff? So if you haven't already said the level that we have had from a few panelists say, and what is the realistic timeframe to get there?
I think it's a bit of a misnomer, because we could protect those two areas while reducing immigration in other areas where it's less needed. But broadly speaking, I think within 5 years, you could get it down to where you wanted it, while, as I say, protecting certain sectors. Nobody on this panel is advocating for zero immigration. I think what we're advocating for is bringing in people who we want in this country, who are going to be beneficial to our society, as opposed to throwing open the border and having hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people come in legally, and also tens of thousands of people come in illegally. My view is we should be shutting the border to illegal immigration immediately, tomorrow. There should be zero immigration illegally into the country. Look, I'm a legal immigrant here. I don't understand why anybody would support people coming into this country by breaking the rules and the law. Zero illegal immigration, and then you work your way down, reducing our essentially attachment to the fact that we've got cheap labor over time. And by the way, I think people on our side of the conversation should be honest. This is going to cost us something. We should stop pretending that money is the only thing that matters in life. It's not.
If the Conservative UK government had have done what was in the interests of their constituent population and stopped illegal immigration, like was at the top of everybody's list, then they would probably win the next election by a landslide. The fact that this is the biggest concern for people, and that Labour are predicted to win the next election, just goes to show how demoralised the Conservative base of the UK must really be, and how much of a shocking job the out-of-touch Conservative Party has done in that country. Sad, really. So guys, make sure to check out Ground News below. You won't regret it. Great company. Also, if you want to check out my links, they'll be below as well. If you guys would like to subscribe to the channel, if you get value from the content, right here. If you'd like to watch another one, right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.